Hash the red light. The traffic light turned red, and Maya pressed the brake pedal with a little more force than necessary. She'd been doing that a lot lately. Everything felt harder, more deliberate, as if she were moving through water instead of air. Through the windshield, the intersection sprawled before her like a stage. A woman in a yellow raincoat hurried across the crosswalk, clutching a grocery bag. A cyclist waited beside Maya's car, one foot on the ground, the other on a pedal, poised for green. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed, growing louder, then fading into the urban symphony of honking horns and rumbling engines. Maya glanced at the passenger seat. The envelope sat there, cream-colored and official, with her name printed in that impersonal font that government offices seem to favor. She'd picked it up from the mailbox 3 hours ago and hadn't opened it yet. She knew what it said, or at least, she thought she did. The final rejection, the end of a process that had consumed 2 years of her life, that had cost her sleep and savings and, eventually, her marriage. The light stayed red. She remembered when she used to love red lights. Back in college, red lights meant a moment to breathe between classes, a chance to change the radio station, to steal a kiss from whoever sat beside her. She'd been with Jake then, before everything got complicated, before they wanted different things from life and couldn't find a way to compromise. Now, at 34, she sat alone at red lights and wondered how she'd gotten here. The cyclist beside her checked his phone. The woman in the yellow raincoat had made it to the other side and was disappearing into a coffee shop. New pedestrians gathered at the corners, waiting for their turn. Maya's phone buzzed in the cup holder. She picked it up, saw her sister's name on the screen, and set it back down. Lauren would want to know about the envelope. Lauren would have opinions about what Maya should do next, suggestions for moving forward. That relentless optimism that had carried her through her own setbacks but somehow exhausted Maya when directed her way. The light was still red. A memory surfaced, unbidden. She was 7 years old, sitting in the back seat of her father's old Buick. They were stopped at a red light. Oh, was it this intersection? It might have been and her father had turned around to look at her and her sister. You know why red lights exist? He'd asked. To make cars stop. Lauren had answered immediately. She was always quick with answers. That's part of it, their father had said, his eyes crinkling in that way that meant he was about to say something he thought was profound. But really? They exist to give everyone a fair chance. Without red lights, only the fastest and most aggressive would get through. Red lights level the playing field. Maya had thought about that a lot over the years, about fair chances and level playing fields, about how sometimes you followed all the rules, stopped at every red light, waited your turn, and still didn't get where you wanted to go. The light shifted through its sequence. Still red. She looked at the envelope again. Inside was the answer to whether she'd be allowed to adopt as a single mother. She'd filled out forms, attended interviews, opened her life to strangers who evaluated her worthiness to be a parent. And somewhere along the way, the process had stopped being about a child and started being about proving something to herself, to Jake, to everyone who'd ever implied that her life was somehow incomplete. But was that fair to a child? To be the answer to someone else's questions instead of a person in their own right? The cyclist shifted his weight, checked the light, checked his phone again. Maya wondered where he was going, whether he was happy, whether he had his own unopened envelopes waiting somewhere. A couple walked past, hand in hand, laughing at some private joke. The woman leaned into the man's shoulder, and he wrapped his arm around her waist. Maya felt the familiar ache of loneliness, but also something else, a curious detachment, as if she were watching a movie instead of living a life. When had that started? This feeling of being one step removed from everything? The light cycled through amber back to red. Was that normal? Maya frowned. Traffic lights weren't supposed to do that. Unless she'd missed the green entirely, lost in thought. She laughed. A short bark of sound that startled her. Here she was, waiting for permission from a traffic light, from a government agency, from life itself to move forward, and she'd been so focused on waiting that she'd missed her chance. The light turned green. Maya didn't move. The cyclist pushed off, gliding into the intersection. Cars behind her began to honk, but she sat there, hands on the wheel, staring at the green light. She picked up the envelope. The paper tore easily, and she pulled out the single sheet inside. Her eyes scanned the formal language, the bureaucratic phrases, looking for the word that mattered. And there it was. Approved. Not rejected. Approved. She'd been so certain it would be bad news that she'd spent hours mourning something that hadn't even happened. Behind her, the honking grew more insistent. The light would be turning red again soon. Maya looked at the approval letter, then at the green light, then at the road ahead. She thought about her father's words, about fair chances and level playing fields. She thought about the child who would come into her life, who would be more than just an answer to her questions, who would have their own red lights and green lights to navigate. And she thought about how she'd teach that child that sometimes you have to wait, and sometimes waiting is the hardest thing in the world, but the waiting doesn't mean the answer is number. Sometimes the waiting is just part of the process. Sometimes you need the red light before you can appreciate the green. The light turned amber. Maya pressed the accelerator, not too hard, not too soft, and drove through the intersection just as the light shifted to red behind her. In her rearview mirror, she watched other cars roll to a stop, other drivers waiting for their turn. Her phone buzzed again. Lauren, probably. Maya smiled and decided she'd call her back, not to share the news that could wait, but to tell her she loved her, that she appreciated her optimism even when it was exhausting, that maybe she'd been wrong about a lot of things. The next light was green, and the one after that. Maya drove with the windows down, letting the spring air rush through the car, carrying away some of the heaviness she'd been holding. The approval letter sat on the passenger seat, and she glanced at it occasionally, still processing what it meant. She didn't know what kind of parent she'd be. She didn't know if she'd be good at this or if she'd fail spectacularly. She didn't know if this was the answer or just another question. But the light was green, and she was moving forward, and for now, that was enough.